Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Luss, joined by Mike Krivchenko and special guest Sam Ehrlich from the lovely Boise, Idaho, Boise State. Sam, remind our listeners, obviously not your first time on, remind our listeners of your lovely credentials at Boise State.
Yeah, I'm an associate professor, and that's actually changed since the last time I've been on. So happy to say associate professor of legal studies at Boise State University in the Department of Strategy and Entrepreneurship, the College of Business and Economics. And aside from that, as part of my research activities, I run a website called the College Sports Litigation Tracker, where I try to keep try being the operative word, of all the litigation surrounding college sports. And I'm also on a podcast called Unilateral Decisions. So happy to be back on. Thanks so much for having me back.
Well, Sam, I'm happy to hear that you have gotten, do we call it a promotion in those ranks or just like
yeah. It is promotion. A promotion, yeah.
Very nice, and I don't expect anything less. What you have not mentioned is, Sam, you are very active on Twitter. I think I've told you this. You are one of a handful of people I get push notifications for, so I see everything. I see all of your tweets. Not the replies, I see all of your tweets. So
it feels like a lot of pressure to not post anything, too off topic.
Yeah, you should feel the pressure. So it's a big distinction. I turn push notifications off when people get crazy. But Sam, for you, I'll keep them on. You basically hit like 900, so it's all good.
I appreciate that.
Our friend Amanda Kristovich occasionally just does a fangirl post about Georgetown. So we look the other way on those. Okay, so we have been overdue for a college sports episode. So we wanted to bring Sam on. Obviously, Mike and I have been covering a number of pro sports issues, obviously not immune to covering college sports issues, but we wanted to do it the right way because the area has been in so much flux. So this time last week, there was a big push. There seemed to be all the momentum, the SEC, the Big Ten. We finally had all the conference leaders on board for the Protect College Sports Act. And we're going to talk about that momentarily. Sam, I remember your last appearance on the podcast. I'm not sure which federal bill we were talking about. It was which one?
It might have been this way back in the SCORE Act.
The SCORE Act. It was a SCORE
Act.
Maybe
before that, I don't know.
And I remember just like, yeah, I guess we can talk about these things. They all keep coming and going. Like they're all just they're literally all academic, right? Until they get passed. And I did sense that something big was happening last week with Protect College Sports Act. You get the Big Ten and the SEC, you get those two on board, and finally now you're talking. It's already bipartisan. And Senator Thune put in, you can probably tell me what the verbiage is, but I guess he put it he attempted to get a vote in before the end of the legislative session. Sam, is that accurate how I'm defining it?
Yeah, I'm no political science expert, but I did stay at a non-sponsored television.
Holiday Inn Express, I think.
Yeah, sure. I was trying to avoid the non-sponsorship, but
yeah, it's okay. They're not going to sponsor us.
But I instead of that, I just follow Kyle Saunders on Twitter, a political science professor at Colorado State. He has a lot of really great stuff about kind of the politics behind it. And yeah, what Senator Thune did is he invoked a motion called cloture, and never really figured out how to pronounce it, but it's the process by which you kind of open the debate for a bill before it goes onto the floor of the Senate or the House, in this case the Senate. And so like a few days before it actually goes up for a floor vote. And during that time, there, as normally happens, there was also kind of a push to try to get what they call unanimous consent, which is the ability to really kind of avoid any kind of debate, avoid any kind of further discussion on the bill and just send it for a vote. But I think kind of previewing, what ended up happening, they did not get unanimous consent. They actually got quite a few senators objecting to unanimous consent, and it seemed pretty clear by the end of the week that it was going to be a really tough vote if they can even get it in time, and they ended up just not being able to get it in time.
So I think it's important, and we should talk today, just to kind of set it up. We're going to talk about the Protect College Sports Act. We're going to talk about these wave of state and federal eligibility cases. So that's the general landscape. Mike has thrown out to talk about Jayden Daniels, which I guess we can do if we have time permitting, but that is not as important as in the general landscape, and it's also nonsensical. But neither here nor there. So on the Protect College Sports Act, and Mike, I know you were tracking this as well. The big update And I guess just like, for lack of a better term, like, how did Senator Thune make this push? Right now, obviously, we're not here, and Sam, you had mentioned to me that we're going to get kicked until mid-September before there's any type of. But they put this to a vote again. So what happened on July 31st? Now 2 weeks prior, I don't think we had recorded the podcast. A new version of the bill was circulated, and it had protections with respect to private equity money coming into the space. It had protections against super conferences. It seemed to be and Sam, whoever wants to take this, it seemed odd that the Big Ten and the SEC were waiting for those changes to sign off on the bill. No private equity and the protections against super conferences. When, if you're wondering how the era of the super conferences has been threatened or why there's conference realignment, it's because the Big Ten is taking schools like UCLA, and the SEC is taking schools like Texas and throwing in a lot of, we'll say, destabilization to other conferences. So it is a very interesting sign that those schools are signing off following those amendments to the bill. Sam, Mike, whoever, has kind of looked into it, just general thoughts. I did think that was a very interesting move, a shift in that space.
Yeah, we'll point out that those aren't the only amendments that were kind of proposed in there to try to assuage the Big Ten and the SEC. There was also a big push by the Big Ten and the SEC to really clarify, because we have, of course, in the House settlement, this revenue share cap. Next year is going to be $21.3 million per athletic department, and a lot of Big Ten and SEC schools feel like it's too low. Notre Dame, while not being in either of those two conferences, they've been very public thinking that it's too low. So what they did is also added a retention cap of another $20 million, along with another $5 million specifically for women's and Olympic sports, to be able to go above the cap and really double the cap at that point, more than double the cap, to be able to continue to directly compensate players. And that's one thing that the Big Ten and the SEC were really kind of firm on, because I think they see just the ability to have a cap being so low really kind of creates more competition for them, because really realistically, in a lot of cases, aside from schools that have just really, really big donor bases, they're going to be the only schools that can afford to go up to what we're talking about, like $45 million at this point. And if there's going to be a hard cap, whether it's something that can be imposed or can be actually enforced or not, that's a different story. But if there's going to be a hard cap, I think the Big Ten and the SEC would prefer it to be high, while also kind of respecting the idea that trying to eliminate loopholes, so at least for themselves they're on even footing.
I'll give you an interesting piece. So, I think if I read the numbers correctly, and you're right, those aren't the main 2 points, but I think it's understandable that the SEC and Big Ten are seemingly okay with a higher cap. What was the number that they got to? Like, was going to be 45 and
something like that? Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. The SEC and Big Ten wanting to make that number higher. I will point out. So I do work in the agent space, and I have these contracts for some of my agents that are split contracts that speak to a certain percentage for rev share contracts and then a certain percentage for third-party marketing contracts. So there are some agents, not my agents, and if my agent wanted to waive it, it's their prerogative, but I wouldn't suggest it. Where some agents waive their rev share, they waive rev share recovery, and they just take money off of NIL, like true third-party NIL. Now, interestingly, if you raise the cap from $21 or $22 million per year and you double it, or right around there, a little bit more than double it, all of a sudden, just like what happened after House, the collectives start to become that much more obsolete, because now you don't need the collectives to find other deals that otherwise you can't get to in the cap. You now have double the cap. So the agents that are out there that have these split deals, like, if God forbid, if you had no percentage of rev share, you're not getting any compensation if all of that is now going through the school. So it's an important shift just in practice. But again, like, this is to the joke that I told you and Amanda and whoever else, like, if it's a federal bill, right? If it's not passed, like, it doesn't really matter. But like, if it does pass and you're sitting on the sidelines and you're not aware of that, that's a real major problem. So, we can't just like completely ignore these. And I do think, well, Mike, let's kind of break the fourth wall. Mike and I had a conversation when we were debating covering this. Like, what are the chances of success? Mike, do you, as someone that's kind of following all these, you follow every update in the sports law space, like, Is this white noise to you, or are you sensing that there's some like real momentum behind this bill? Because I might be a little bit biased.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it and shared our opinion. I don't think my opinion's changed at all over the last number of months. I think it's relatively white noise, at least for now. It's, to me, too large and too diverse of a space for a blanket anything to be passed. Like Sam, you were just talking about, there's only a very small subsection of schools that can actually afford to participate at some of these levels that they're discussing. So to me, I think it's white noise. It's been a very big focus on the administration to protect college sports and bring it back to its quote unquote glory. And I think that a lot of the pressure is coming from that, whereas, less so on figuring out what's actually going to work. I think it's just very much a pressure from the top. Let's figure this out. It's more a visual thing than what I imagine to be an actual practical application. And yeah, white noise to me for now. I don't think it changes a month from now. We're recording on August 14th, September 14th, they're back. I don't foresee anything groundbreaking happening.
So I want to pitch it to you with this, Sam, and then we don't need to spend so much more time on it because we're not sure if it's going to be there or if it's going to be this bill, a different bill. But I think in a more holistic sense, we have not, like, we did this show 5 years ago and we're like, oh, the next thing is unionization. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And, I think there was some chatter about a federal bill. Obviously, back then there was congressional sessions. We were talking about it, but it didn't seem like an inevitability. It seemed like the race of against the clock unionization would get there first. And that would probably be the better one because you'd have real collective bargaining and real voices of players at the table. So I would like to get your thoughts on this position, Sam. I'm of the opinion that will not get a union and we will not get a CBA until a federal bill is passed. And if a federal bill is passed, I think that's the motivation that the players need to say, like, well, we had no real say in this. This was decided by, legislators on Capitol Hill. Like now we are incentivized. This whole world of free transfers and free this, and we could go to court. Like, now that we've lost all of the reasons that, like, where we were benefiting from anarchy, okay, now let's bite the bullet. Now let's go through the unionization pie. Is that a fair hypothesis you could buy?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a pretty distinct parallel there to something we've all associated in the sports law world a few years ago, which was the unionization of minor league baseball players. Followed a very similar path. The minor league baseball players had filed a Fair Labor Standards Act lawsuit, the sending litigation, and shortly, while that was ongoing, Congress passed the Save America's Pastime Act, which did not really do what it was intended by, kind of stopping Major League Baseball from cutting all these minor league teams, but did give Major League Baseball an FLSA exemption, broadly speaking, for minor league baseball players. We're only requiring them to pay minor league baseball players minimum wage across 40 hours a week and not for spring training and all these different things. And I don't think it was a coincidence that it was very shortly after that bill was passed that we actually saw, the Major League Baseball Players Association kind of bring in the minor league players. The minor league players have been pushing for unionization on their own accord and kind of bring them into their own collective bargaining agreement. So that's now a thing. And I don't know if the Save America's Pastime Act was directly the reason for it. It's definitely a strong parallel. And yeah, I think there's a pretty strong parallel here as well, where if there is something passed and something where it really does hamstring the rights of players, then the players have extra incentive to unionize and try to do something better, try to do something where they can kind of push past it. But I will say the difference between the Save America's Pastime Act and the Protect College Sports Act is really scope. I mean, large part is scope. I mean, the Save America's Pastime Act was really just that one clause, while the Protect College Sports Act is over 100 pages of different things. And you're really hamstringing this potential union by passing this bill in the first place. And I think that explains a lot of the opposition behind the bill. The fact that the Protect College Sports Act is neutral on employment is a huge thing, not only on the right for Republicans who feel like it should say that it means that college athletes are not employees and therefore can't unionize down the road as part of that. But you're also seeing, and Jesse Doherty, I've noticed, has reported a lot on this, You're seeing a lot of opposition by Senators Murphy and Booker of Connecticut and New Jersey, very much opposed to the fact that the Protect College Sports Act does not include the ability for athletes to be able to have their voice be heard. So, yeah, I think as far as your theory goes, I think it would definitely be a huge push to get athletes to interested in unionizing, but I'm also not sure it necessarily necessary that it's it needs to be that as kind of the push, given that we are also seeing some kind of work movement towards unionization on various different fronts, including from Stanford football and Oregon State women's basketball.
Well, Sam, I'm happy that you agree with it because your opinion means a lot in the space, and you are obviously looking very closely. So I like the comparison to minor league baseball, but I think that is a good transition. So listen, we'll follow the space closely, but I do think when you get one, you'll get both, and it's if you could parlay the two things both happening in a calendar year, I think that's really where it's at. Okay. So the next piece that we should talk about, and Sam, you and I had a conversation earlier in the week, and obviously, you are a wealth of knowledge of this and a wealth of wealth of materials. I'm very impressed with your ability to track a lot of this stuff down. So we have had seismic movements on the eligibility front, and we have not covered it on the show other than to say that they were ongoing and we'll cover it at some point. So a series of, two class action suits, Wisney in Colorado and Campbell in Ohio, were filed July 8th and July 9th, back-to-back days, both essentially seeking the same relief. If you were a 2022 high school graduate that basically didn't redshirt, you played 4 years. You played your freshman year, your sophomore year, junior year, your senior, and you were all set to graduate, right? Like you were set to walk off into the sunset. There's obviously, you make some exceptions, but if you basically were a true senior, or you used a year of eligibility as a true freshman, you never took a red year along the way, you were set to graduate. There was really no expectation that any of these players would play again, because why would they? The NCAA passed a rule, the 5 and 5 rule, or some people are calling it the 5 for 5 rule, essentially that because of all the, we'll say, shenanigans, for lack of a better term, that a lot of athletes had taken around the space over the past few years in terms of COVID waivers, injury waivers, in the case of Trinidad Chambliss, a tonsils waiver, like, whatever the waivers were, people were really taking advantage of it, and there was a rush to the courts. So if you didn't like what the NCAA said, you went to your local state court judge and generally would get the requested relief. So the NCAA took a very big, and not all the time, but most of the time, the NCAA took a fairly, well, Sam, you're looking at me. I feel like that won most of the time.
They did win most of the time.
Yeah.
Once it transitioned to state courts and kind of the contract theories that we began to see, it began to be much more of a kind of a winning proposition for the players, but they were not nearly as successful with kind of the earlier antitrust lawsuits, with Pavia, of course, and other ancillary cases like Jetty Ladd and Jabari Robinson excluded.
Yeah, I think by and large, the only time that the players would win is when it didn't really make sense, right? Like they shouldn't really be winning those cases. Those are, for what basis do you have a hardship? Like, you're going to make a lot more extra money, great, but the rules are meant to be enforced. But neither here nor there. There was a degree of success on those cases, and just the nature that they were popping up and forcing the NCAA to defend them is worthwhile. So the NCAA said, let's do away with this rule that we've had for many, many years. Now there's no more. And Sam, actually, you might know this. I don't know this answer. We have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. What are we going to call these 5 years? We're going to call it year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. That's what we're going to call them athletically.
So they actually just called it. They're sticking with freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, but then they're just calling them 5th year after that, which is pretty unimaginative. But
yeah, it's pretty lame. Super senior would have been better. I had a friend that took a couple extra years to graduate. He was a super senior, but
super duper senior.
So, with that being said, you had that series of cases that were filed. The NCAA filed this and said, you know what, let's do away with hardship. We're just going to give everybody 5. Let's not worry about the red shirt. Let's not worry about this. Everybody gets 5. And because the class of 22 kids just graduated, let's just make this for next year. It's all easy. Sounds good. So when that rule was passed, Sam, candidly, I thought the rule made sense. Not to say that, if I had some interest in the class of 22 or I was a graduating senior, that maybe is not the most fair, or like, why are you picking this cutoff here? And meanwhile, like, you could have a classmate that had a redshirt year in the middle, and now this kid is moving on. So, Sam, that leads us to that July 8th, the Wisney class action lawsuit is filed. It is a challenge, again, by 2022 graduates that played 4 years, and they sought a temporary restraining order. I think the court kicked the TRO question and just moved it to be a preliminary injunction, and essentially said, hey, all of you 2022 high school graduating athletes, I know you guys thought you were about to graduate. There was a lot of things you might have been doing. You might have been looking at the pros. You might have been looking to go to law school. Guess what? You're now allowed to go back to school. It's a little bit of a Van Wilder situation. And it's very much, in the NCAA in their briefing said it would throw all of the Division I programs into roster chaos. It definitely has. And, even now schools aren't sure whether they should pay these kids or not, because that case is being currently briefed. We'll see if we have an update while the show is ongoing. But we have an appeal to the 10th Circuit, to the NCAA, or by the NCAA, to try to unwind that injunction. So I've said a lot. Sam, I know you are a much more eloquent speaker than myself because you're following this very closely. Why don't you explain what is now happening at the 10th Circuit with respect to the NCAA's latest briefing?
Yeah, and first thing I want to note is that like the Wisney case is definitely kind of the highlight here, because it is something where they were given class-wide relief. It is filed as class action. They were granted class certification. It does apply to every single high school class of 2022 that exhausted their eligibility in 2026. So they only got their 4 years, as you said. True freshman, no redshirt, anything like that. But there's been about a dozen of these lawsuits. If not more, that I just don't know about, just in various different state courts, a few in federal court as well, where you're really seeing, like, we talked, Dan, we just talked about, the kind of, okay, you said they're largely winning. I said, well, not in the antitrust cases, but yes, on the state court cases. Every single lawsuit that's been filed over this has been successful for the plaintiffs. I've not seen one where the NCAA has actually been able to defend this, which is really extraordinary and really quite a statement. And like, digging into the language, courts are really, really, really furious with the NCAA over this kind of thing, over their exclusion of these players from this new rule. They really feel like it's arbitrary and capricious. They feel like it's being applied unfairly, and they're really pushing back against the NCAA and doing things like enjoining transfer rules and joining. At some point, or in a couple of these cases, they even kind of brought up the prospect, even if they didn't do it. They brought up the prospect of even enjoining roster caps. Like, they are really taking major action against the NCAA here. And the NCAA, clearly is not very happy about this. So to your question, what's going on at the 10th Circuit? We had this injunction filed in Colorado by Judge Charlotte Sweeney, and the NCAA applied for a motion for a stay, as they're required to do it with her court before they can do it at the 10th Circuit. She obviously denied it, and the NCAA right now is trying to seek a stay at the 10th Circuit. There will probably be a decision sometime Monday afternoon, Tuesday, something like that. Dan, I think you know better than I do. Whenever courts, give a briefing schedule and they actually put times on when the specific briefs are due, that's a good sign that they're looking to move real quickly. So, the plaintiff's response in opposition to the motion for a stay is due actually today at 4 p.m. So, as we're recording this, about 24 minutes from now, or 3 p.m. I should say, 3 p.m. Mountain. And then the NCAA's reply brief is due 10 a.m. on Monday Mountain Time. So we'll probably get a decision pretty shortly after that, if not just a few hours after that. And really, the way I see it, this stay is the whole ballgame. Like, the NCAA is appealing this injunction. They're looking to get the injunction overturned, but to me, that doesn't even really matter as much, given that we're so close to the season starting. I mean, how quickly is the 10th Circuit going to actually be able to move on this injunction? Appellate courts just don't move that fast. We saw last year a bunch of these cases, a bunch of these eligibility rule cases, where the courts would overrule the district courts granting an injunction, and it didn't matter because the players had already finished their entire seasons. That happened with the West Virginia players, and there were two players in Texas, Rashawn Agee and Lewis Moore, who not only did they were able to finish the seasons, but they actually filed a motion to dismiss the case because It's like, okay, well, we don't need to hear what the appeal is going to be because we already won, so who cares? A couple cases in Nevada where the players got preliminary injunctions where even right now, like they already played their seasons last year and we still don't have a decision from the Ninth Circuit. So whether the 10th Circuit can move that quickly, I think is just not going to happen. So whether they stay this injunction or not, if they stay the injunction, that the injunction stops being in effect and these players cannot play, and if they don't see the injunction, the players can play. I honestly think that's the whole game right there.
And Sam, do you think this goes all the way to the Supreme Court?
I think it could. I think it definitely could because there's obviously an avenue to actually file an emergency stay with the Supreme Court as well. It would go in front of Justice Gorsuch, who has jurisdiction over the 10th Circuit. Justice Gorsuch, who of course was the majority opinion author in Alston, so that could be interesting. Though I think the NCAA would still prefer that to Kavanaugh, given his concurrence in Alston. But yeah, it's very possible that either the plaintiffs or the NCAA, depending on how this motion for stay turns out, files an emergency stay with the Supreme Court as well.
The other part that I don't want to lose sight of, and I do think this could go to the Supreme Court. I mean, put it this way, I think the NCAA, if they're taking it to the 10th Circuit, they're at least going to have that conversation. So in the just like practicality, we can have this conversation in a vacuum as lawyers, but right now, football practice is going on. And we have coaches, I've heard from a number of players that I just need someone to be able to tell my coach what's going to happen in these cases. And I'm like, well, I'm certainly not going to to say that we have no idea. No one can predict one or the other. Yes, you could certainly forecast that the NCAA is in bad shape, right? Because they lost at the first level, but it's not 100%, number one. And number two, it puts schools in a really difficult spot. Now, for fall athletes, it's very difficult. Now, it's a little bit easier for spring, but this NIL money, if you're a school and you have rev share money that could be allocated to a certain player, or you're a third party, you're a brand, and you want to try to figure out what your budget allotment is, you don't know if a player that you want to give is going to get playing time because it's this senior or the super senior, whatever we're going to call them, is going to take roster time. Are you comfortable as a brand or as rev share paying out now for a guy that again might not be with the program if the NCAA prevails? So it's just a really dicey landscape. I did an interview with an outlet earlier in the week, and I go, yes, we could talk about Wild Wild West and things being unprecedented, but this is completely different. We've never had just so much roster flux. So kind of dovetailing back, Sam, to our conversation about the federal bill, that's why I think Sweeney was trying to get this done. I think July 31st is when the injunction was issued.
Yep. July 31st.
And fall practice has really started this week on the football side. And the federal bill, you thought you were going to get, maybe a shot there that was going to at least maybe clear some things up. And maybe, Sam, even the federal bill will attempt to try to have some, control around what's going on with the Wisney case. I have no idea.
Funny, and this actually came up just today in a hearing in Kentucky. Ryan Doughton, who's the attorney for a lot of these players, including originally Diego Pavia, he actually made an argument to the court that if you read the text of the Print College Sports Act, if it's passed today, it actually grants these players eligibility, the class of 22 players, because it gives 5 years. It imposes that. It does not have this takes effect on this date. So it's actually a very strong argument that
it's interesting. Well, how does he? But why would it apply to 2022 kids?
Because it does not. It doesn't limit based on the only limitation is that they have to be a student athlete, and if they're playing right now,
if we're playing devil's advocate,
really define what student athlete is. So,
well, it's interesting if the Protect College Sports Act would have also granted that relief, but now we're kind of in flux. The Protect College Sports Act, if it passed, was concrete. We would have had that answer. Now we kind of have it. We kind of don't. So, I've Sam, and you and I spoke. There's a number of state court cases. There's a handful of federal cases. The one that I thought was interesting of bringing up. Are you familiar with the Cole Hudson case matter, the waiver?
Yeah, Texas offensive lineman.
Yeah, I'd love if you could speak a little bit about that. It's an odd case. I think it's the only case of its type, correct? With a player that played for an NFL team at these type of cycles.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, it's kind of hard to say that for sure because there's so many of these basketball players, and these various the various kind of not the full Wisney class action case, but like the Washington case, the Godfrey case, the one in California. All of those have a number of different plaintiffs, and some of whom have gone to mini camps and stuff like that. But definitely the Hudson one is a little unique because he did go to mini camp. He did sign even if temporarily with an NFL team, and he was looking to come back, and that's something where I think it shows kind of the broad extent to which the courts are really kind of viewing these issues and taking these cases, where they're perfectly willing to enjoin that bylaw if they think it's correct. They're not really kind of saying, well, we're only going to stick to these particular bylaws, or at least they're not. In most cases, they're not. They're really kind of really pushing the NCAA to kind of apply it very, very broadly.
So I think that's a good place to kind of table this conversation with respect to the eligibility cases. I mean, listen, there are a ton of them. We have to look very closely at Wisney. Just to close the loop, we said that the Campbell case was filed because Wisney is now the prevailing case at the federal court level. Wisney was voluntarily withdrawn. So
Campbell was actually moved to Colorado.
Well, what do we say? It was withdrawn at that court and then joined together. And I think the Hudson case. I know it's kind of an interesting case. My understanding is that did he receive a waiver from the NCAA as a result of this? Was it a or voluntary joining of that class?
I think it was a voluntary joining of the class. I think the parties kind of agreed that, as far as I remember, and I haven't looked at this situation a little bit, but as far as I remember, he was able to get the TRO, and then the parties agreed that since he's part of the Wisney class, that he would just be able to play, and the NCAA would just kind of seed ground and allow the TRO to continue going unless the Wisney case was overturned, which is kind of what we're seeing with a lot of these different cases, where a lot of them at this point are very much pending on, well, let's see what happens with Wisney.
I was at an event last night, Sam, and just while I wanted to bring up Hudson. So if you have a player, Sam, that goes through the draft process, right? So like, for example, RJ Lewis, who went through the draft process, declared as an underclassman when he had years left, was drafted, played in summer league for the Celtics, now is trying to go back and play for LSU. I don't know how this will be treated. Like, I think in the NBA in general, they talk about draft and stash. You can keep a guy and you have his rights for a certain amount of time. You could tell me we're missing someone. I don't recall a player ever going through the draft process, playing in a summer league, and then now going back through the draft process. Is he draft eligible, or does he have to report back to the Celtics? Like, these are questions that we've just never had to ask. So, I'm not quite sure how we're going to handle that as just a general sports public. But then again, those players that want, like I spoke with a player the other day who was he had a cup of coffee in the minor leagues, right? Just small thing. And he said, well, if I knew the 5-and-5 rule was going to be passed, I would have obviously just stayed in school and I would have made a lot more money and I wouldn't have been, traveling on the road. Those athletes like Hudson are a little bit different than the typical, 4-year guys. They have something else. So it's a lot harder, I would think, on a class level to kind of just earmark those guys. But there's so many just question marks just permeating the space about who's going to be allowed in 2 years. If you declared as a freshman, you went to Spain, can you come back now? So, I said we'll table it. There's so many interesting academic questions popping out of it. Mike, sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's the endless conversation until we get some update on the federal side. But Mike, do you want to fill everybody in on what's going on with Jayden Daniels and Sam? We can hit that, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit, maybe like you said, nonsensical, a little bit less serious of a topic compared to eligibility and the futures of student athletes. This is something that, at least from my timelines and everyone that I've spoken to, really just one of the craziest just requests, I guess you could throw it out there, of all time for an athlete. Jayden Daniels, I mean, I feel most people that are listening probably know, but drafted second overall by the Commanders in 2024. I mean, started off extremely strong, brought them to the playoffs, NFC Championship game. Like, last year was a little bit rougher coming off of an injury and, making sure to come back, but very much one of the top quarterback stars, young, futures of the league. So huge name to come out and do this. But interestingly enough, he had reached out and sent a cease and desist letter to LSU, his former or his alma mater, that he won a national title with. Am I mistaken there? I'm pretty sure he did a lot of great things with LSU. So just very surprising to see, you know, a relationship like this. But cease and desist letter sent last week from his attorney, Adam Kenner, and the actual language, at least in it, says, accordingly, LSU must immediately cease and desist from any further issue, use, display, publication, distribution, everything essentially along the lines of using Jayden Daniels' NIL in any manner or medium. And right away, your brain goes off. It's like, we're really like, what led to this? Why is this happening? And apparently, breaking it all down comes down to them giving away his jersey number, which is just mind-boggling to me. You know, that's something of.
Well, they gave it to a freshman. They gave it to a freshman.
I get that. You know, I do understand, like, numbers are numbers, and people do very much, you know, care deeply about their number.
Actually, I
and,
apologize. I think it was a sophomore. I don't want to
Sophomore. He didn't get a
slander
lot
Mr. Pickett.
Brian Kelly, but Lane Kiffin said, you know, hey, we'll give you what you were promised.
Yeah, I mean, so like this is a big story. Like for whatever reason, it is picked up on ESPN. People are really paying attention to it. I'm not sure if it's the pettiness, but there's no merit to it, right? Like when you sign up to play for LSU, right? Like or any of these schools, you know, we could talk about it, but like this is the NIL conversation. Like what like. Okay, you're upset that your number wasn't retired. You're upset that you weren't maybe consulted on who gave your number out. There seems to be no legal basis, right? So you could send in a cease and desist for anyone to stop doing anything. Now, like, is LSU going to adhere to that? Like, probably not. And the other part too is now, you know, if you go to the bookstore, right, and you see a number 5 LSU jersey, right, like who is that associated with? Clearly, you know, they're intending to use that on other players moving forward. So, Sam, did you think there was any merit to this? Like, it seemed like it was complete fodder, like immediately.
Well, I will say that maybe not out of caution for litigation, but maybe just out of, you know, returning the pettiness. Trey Wallace of Fox News has reported that LSU has pulled Jayden Daniels' jersey from their website. So, yeah, I just thought that was pretty funny and kind of a fun statement about all this. But it's kind of interesting because there. You know, we think about this and we think about kind of the pettiness and you know, about kind of the jersey number specifically, but there's a couple of other lawsuits that are ongoing right now that make kind of similar claims in kind of a different way. I mean, we have, you know, Jameson Williams, who filed a lawsuit against Big Ten, SEC, and the NCAA, and we also have Ezekiel Elliott, who filed a lawsuit against the NCAA and the Big Ten over largely similar reasons, saying, you're continuing to use our NIL after we graduate, and you're not paying us to do that, and that is a violation of our intellectual property rights. It's a violation of our right of publicity, and an antitrust issue, and all these different issues as well. We also saw similar lawsuits, each of which were kicked due to statute of limitations, but kind of surrounding the House settlement and all that, we saw athletes like Reggie Bush and Mario Chambers and Denard Robinson filed kind of similar lawsuits as well. So there's definitely, I don't know if I'd go far as to say there's merit to it, but there's definitely a gripe here. There's definitely a legitimate gripe here that, hey, you're continuing to use our name, image, likeness in, you know, for these commercial matters, and you need to pay us for it if you're using it through like game broadcasts or sponsored posts or anything like that. And, you know, I think it's interesting because, you know, you do really have to kind of figure out where the line is, because it's one thing to be just highlighting someone's historical legacy with the program and saying this player was a great person for us. Jayden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy for us, and you know that's something that we want to celebrate. But it is a little bit different when you're doing that and saying, and by the way, this post is sponsored by Popeyes. Like, that changes the conversation a little bit, right? That changes the meaning. It changes the, you know, exactly what the reason why you're doing it. And trying to figure out the line there, I think, is just a really fascinating question, and maybe not one that we're going to get to explore on this Jayden Daniels case, but you know, certainly in other cases for sure.
Well, it does bring up, like, it just at the celebrity level, like you could have an exclusivity where you don't want someone like to be let's say promoting a particular brand. So like if we do a deal, for example, like with Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Like Dick's Sporting Goods has sneakers, they have a lot of different things. And if an athlete that we're working with has a particular Nike exclusivity or Adidas or Reebok exclusivity, like you have to be very careful with what Dick's can do. Same thing with like spirits or alcohol. Like if I don't, maybe that's Daniel's concern, but like LSU has this historical footage that they want to use of him, right? And if they're now tying that to some type of brand and some type of commercial endeavor, that might impact like his other bigger ticket things that are going directly into his pocket. And, maybe it's precedent setting, but I think as Mike kind of alluded to, like this is all kind of cheapened by the fact that like it was, same day that the jersey was given away. So that just kind of rubbed people the wrong way.
Now, of course, like, we're a week later, like they are claiming that it's not just the jersey thing. It is his attorney's letter specifically cited the original NIL agreement that the school had the right to use his NIL for 180 days after his final college game, which is obviously well more than 180 days ago. So I think, like you mentioned, Sam, the more that NIL agreements are signed and the more time goes on, I'm sure we'll see actually probably more to come like this. But yes, the timing and I think, way that it was presented was definitely not favorable for Jayden Daniels, and former players across the board have just been, taking shots. So, and I thought it was something at least worth making note of on the podcast because it's such a, top story. The fact that I got a notification on ESPN about it is enough to be like, okay, this is, I guess, gotten to the mainstream. And yeah, seeing some of the responses has been pretty comical, but yeah, we'll see what comes out of it. I'm not sure much.
Yeah, what's that expression? Bad facts make bad law. This would definitely be a case where it probably wouldn't go well for Daniels. But in other situations, if it's not tied to, I'm pissed because you gave away my jersey number, there might actually be some legitimacy there.
Okay. I think that's a good place to end it. Sam, we appreciate you tremendously hopping on. Mike, as always. And yeah, I think this space, like, well, obviously, Sam, we'd love to have you on whenever there's another big update, but it's just really like touch and go. So if you're anyone that knows anyone that's a college athlete, if you're a 2021 kid, you have a right to be upset, right? If you played 4 years, 4 playing years and 5 years, like maybe you're upset that you didn't get to play 5 years, right? It's just the nature of the beast. So I don't think that we're going to have a correct answer, but we will continue to follow it. And, to the extent that something comes up that is of substance, Sam, I know that you're on it. Sam, why don't you tell people again about your website and where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Sam C. Ehrlich, SAMCEHRLICH, all one word. You can also find me on my website, collegesportslitigationtracker.com. I also have my own podcast with a few former Boise State athletic administrators, kind of blending the law and the governance part of it. It's called Unilateral Decisions. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, all those different places as well. So yeah, plenty of opportunities to check me out if you're interested in hearing more.
Great. Sam, great stuff. Appreciate you. And that'll do it for us here at Conduct Detrimental. And see you next time on another episode of the Sports Law Podcast, Conduct Detrimental.